without objection.
I thank you, Mr. President. Today, the President of the United States traveled to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to mark the end of the war in Iraq and to pay tribute to the more than 1.5 million men and women of our armed forces who have served and fought there since 2003. Those Americans deserve all of the praise and recognition they receive, for they've given up their comfort and safety. They've given up less demanding and more lucrative jobs. They've given parts of their bodies and cherished parts of their lives. They've given the quiet little sacrifices that often go unmentioned, but often hurt the most. The anniversary spent alone, the birth of a child missed, the first steps not seen, and the first words not heard. They've given all of that, and always they are prepared to give more. They deserve to be honored by us all. I know that the President's words of praise and appreciation for our troops today were sincere and heartfelt, and I have every reason to believe that he will do all in his power to keep his promises to take care of our troops and their families here at home, and to never forget how those noble Americans have done far more than their fair share for the betterment of our nation. The President is a patriot and a good American, and I know that his heart swells with the same pride and sense of awe that all of us feel when we are in the presence of our men and women in uniform. These are humbling feelings, feelings of wonderment and gratitude, and they unite all Americans, whether you supported the war in Iraq or not. But let me point out a fact that the President did not acknowledge today, which is this. Our men and women in uniform have been able to come home from Iraq by the tens of thousands over the past 3 years, and not just come home, but come home with honor, having succeeded in their mission for the simple reason that the surge worked. All of this is possible because in 2007, with the war nearly lost, we changed our strategy, changed our leaders in the field, and sent more troops. This policy was vehemently opposed at the time by then Senator Obama and now President of the United States and his senior leaders right here on the floor of this Senate. On January 10, 2007, the day the surge strategy was announced, then Senator Obama said, quote, "I am not persuaded that 20,000 additional troops in Iraq is going to solve the sectarian violence there. In fact, I think it will do the reverse." On November 15, 2007, when it was clear to General David Petraeus and Ambassador Ryan Crocker and many of us that the surge was working, then Senator Obama said, and I quote, "The overall strategy is failed because we have not seen any change in behavior among Iraq's political leaders." Finally, on January 28, 2008, when it was undeniable the surge was succeeding, he had this to say. President Bush said that the surge in Iraq is working, and we know that's just not true. At the time, the President's preferred alternative was to begin an immediate withdrawal and have all U.S. troops out of Iraq by the end of 2009. I'll let future historians be the judge of that proposed policy. All I will say is that for 3 years, the President has been harvesting the successes of the very strategy that he consistently dismissed as a failure. I imagine this irony was not lost on a few of our troops at Fort Bragg today, most of whom deployed and fought as part of the surge. The fact is, the President has consistently called for a complete withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Iraq at the earliest possible date, and he has never deviated from this position as President. Indeed, He has always reaffirmed his campaign promise to end the war in Iraq and withdraw all of our troops. So perhaps it should not have come as a surprise when the President announced in October that he was ending negotiations with the Iraqi government over whether to maintain a small number of U.S. troops in Iraq beyond this year to continue assisting Iraq's security forces. I continue to believe that this decision represents a failure of leadership, both Iraqi and American, that it was a sad case of political expediency triumphing over military necessity, both in Baghdad and in Washington, and that it will have serious negative consequences for Iraq's stability and our national security interests. I sincerely hope that I am wrong, but I fear that General Jack Keane, who was one of the main architects of the surge, could be correct again when he said recently, and I quote, "We won the war in Iraq, and we're now losing the peace." Let me be clear. Like all Americans, I too am eager to bring our troops home. I do not want them to remain in Iraq or anywhere else for a day longer than necessary. But I also agree with our military commanders in Iraq who were nearly unanimous in their belief that some U.S. forces, approximately 20,000, should remain for a period of time to help the Iraqis secure the hard-earned gains that we had made together. All of our top commanders in Iraq, by the way, chosen by the President of the United States, all of our top commanders in Iraq, General Petraeus, General Odierno, General Austin, all of them believed that we needed to maintain a presence of U.S. troops there, and they consistently made clear to many of us during our repeated visits to Iraq. On February 3rd, the commander of U.S. forces in Iraq, General Lloyd Austin, and U.S. Ambassador to Iraq, Jim Jeffrey, testified to the Committee on Armed Services that for all of the progress the Iraqi security forces had made in recent years, and it's been substantial, they still have critical gaps in their capabilities that will endure beyond this year. Those shortcomings including enabling functions for counterterrorism operations, the control of Iraq's airspace and other external security missions, intelligence collection and fusion, and training and sustainment of the force. Our commanders wanted U.S. troops to remain in Iraq beyond this year to continue assisting Iraqi forces in filling these gaps in their capabilities. Indeed, Iraqi commanders believe the exact same thing. In August, the Chief of Staff of Iraq's armed forces could not have been any clearer. He said, I quote, "The problem will start after 2011, he said. The politicians must find other ways to fill the void after 2011. If I were asked about the withdrawal," he stated, "I would say to politicians the U.S. Army must stay until the Iraqi Army is fully ready in 2020. During repeated travels to Iraq with my colleagues, I've met with all of the leaders of Iraq's major political blocs, and they too said they would support keeping a presence of U.S. troops in Iraq. So let's be clear. This is not what our commanders recommended. It is what Iraqi commanders recommended, and it is what all of Iraq's key political leaders said privately that they were prepared to support. So what happened? What happened? Advocates of withdrawal are quick to point out that the current security arrangement, which requires all U.S. troops to be out of Iraq by the end of this year, was concluded by the Bush administration, and that is true. But it's also beside the point. The authors of that agreement always intended for it to be renegotiated at a later date to allow some U.S. forces to remain in Iraq. As former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, whose State Department team negotiated the security agreement, has said, quote, "There was an expectation that we would negotiate something that looked like a residual force for our training with the Iraqis." She stated, "Everybody believed it would be better if there was some kind of residual force." So if that's not the reason, I ask again, what happened? The prevailing narrative is that the U.S. and Iraqi leaders could not reach agreement over the legal protections needed to keep our troops in Iraq. To be sure, this was a matter of vital importance. But while this may have been a reason for our failure, the privileges and immunities issues is less a cause than a symptom of the larger reason why we could not reach agreement with the Iraqis. Because of his political promise to fully withdraw from Iraq, the President never brought the full weight of his office to bear in shaping the politics and the events on the ground in Iraq so as to secure a residual presence of U.S. troops. This left our commanders and our negotiators at Baghdad mostly trying to respond to events in Iraq, trying to shape events without the full influence of the American president behind them. Last May, I traveled to Iraq with the senator from South Carolina, Senator Graham. We met with all of the major Iraqi leaders, and all of them were ready to come to an agreement on a future presence of U.S. troops in Iraq. But as Prime Minister Maliki explained to us, the administration at that time and for the foreseeable future had not given the Iraqi government a number of troops and missions that it would propose to keep in Iraq. For weeks after, the administration failed to make a proposal to the Iraqis. And when the Iraqis finally united together in August and publicly asked the administration to begin negotiations, the response from Washington was again characterized by delay. This ensured that a serious negotiation could not begin, much less succeed. I know Iraq is a sovereign country. I know it has an elected government that must answer to public opinion, and I know there could be no agreement over a future U.S. military presence in Iraq if Iraqis did not agree to it and build support for it. So this is as much a failure of Iraqi leadership as it is of American leadership. But to blame this on the Iraqis does not excuse the fact that we had an enormous amount of influence with Iraq's leaders, and we did not exercise it to the fullest extent possible to achieve an outcome that was in our national security interest. In fact, in the view of many, they deliberately refused to come up with a number. They deliberately refused to engage in serious negotiation with the Iraqis with the ultimate purpose of fulfilling the President's campaign pledge that he would get all troops, United States troops, out of Iraq. That's not a violation of sovereignty, that's diplomacy, that's leadership. Leaders must shape events in public opinion, not just respond to them. And starting in early 2009, from their desire to accelerate our withdrawal from Iraq faster than our commanders recommended, to their hands-off approach to the Iraqi process of government formation last year, to their record of delay and passivity on the question of maintaining a presence of U.S. troops beyond this year, this administration has consistently failed at the highest level to lead on Iraq. I say again, perhaps this outcome should not have been a surprise. It's what the President has consistently promised to do, and that decision makes good political sense for this President. But such decisions should not be determined by domestic politics. The brave Americans who fought so valiantly and given so much did so not for political reasons, but for the safety and security of their fellow citizens, for their friends, for their families, for their children's futures, and for us. This is a decisive moment in the history of America's relationship with Iraq and with all of the countries of the broader Middle East. This is a moment when the substantial influence that we have long enjoyed in that part of the world could be receding. In fact, is receding. We cannot allow that to be our nation's future. We must continue to lead. We must not let short-term political gains dictate our longer-term goals. We need to continue to shape a freer, more just, and more secure future both for Iraq and for the peoples across the Middle East, for it is in our own national security interest to do so. Over 4,000 brave young Americans gave their lives in this conflict. I hope and I pray that these decisions made in a large part for political reasons, I pray that their sacrifice is not in vain. I hope that their families will not mourn the day that their sons and daughters went out to fight for freedom for the Iraqi people. Unfortunately, it is clear that this decision of a complete pullout of United States troops from Iraq was dictated by politics and not our national security interests. I believe that history will judge this President's leadership with the scorn and disdain that it deserves. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk call the roll of the Senate.
Mr. Akaka. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell today objected to a Democratic request To recap what happened earlier today in the Senate, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell objected to a Democratic request to vote on a House-passed extension of the payroll tax cut. The Hill, writing that Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid said that Senator McConnell blocked a vote because Republican senators did not want to take a stance on controversial provisions in the bill, such as requiring the recipients of unemployment benefits to take drug tests. Senator McConnell said Congress should first take up an omnibus spending bill to fund the government for fiscal 2012, saying that with the government funding due to run out Friday, averting a government shutdown should be the first priority. Here in the Senate, we expect general speeches until about 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Earlier today, we covered a House hearing about calls for the head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to resign. NRC Chairman Gregory Yatsko said he would not step down, attributing complaints about him by fellow commissioners to his aggressive emphasis on ensuring safety at U.S. nuclear plants after the Japanese Fukushima reactor crisis earlier this year. Commission members say Mr. Yatsko bullied staff and withheld information from them. We'll have that hearing in our overnight programming, and you can see it right now at cspan.org. The Senate took a couple of votes today on balanced budget amendments to the Constitution. Here's how the Washington Times is writing about the votes. The Senate roundly rejected two proposals for balanced budget amendments in a vote set forth in this past summer's hard-fought debt reduction deal. Both plans, one from each party, were easily defeated as expected. Senators voted down the Democratic plan 79-21, while rejecting a Republican version 53-47 on a straight party line vote. The amendments needed a two-thirds majority to pass, and neither came close. Another story in the Washington Times, Congress once again is flirting with a partial government shutdown for the third time this year, and Republicans accuse Democrats of blocking the critical year-end funding bill in order to use it as leverage in the payroll tax cut negotiations. The current stopgap funding runs out on Friday, and while those writing the replacement bill say it's ready to go, Democratic leaders insist that it's not done, though they acknowledge that it could be wrapped up speedily if all sides wanted to. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said that he will not allow a final full-year spending bill to pass until he and House Republicans work out an extension of the payroll tax cut into 2012.
The quorum call be suspended.
Without objection, the senator is recognized.
Mr. President, the House yesterday passed a bill that included an effort to move forward on the Keystone XL pipeline project, and I want to talk about that project for a while today and American energy generally. We all agree that private sector job creation needs to be the #1 priority in Washington, and one of the best ways to jumpstart job creation is simply through good energy projects. The shortest path to more American jobs is more American energy. Unfortunately, the President and the administration have delayed one of the largest domestic shovel-ready projects until after the election next year. This is a project that's ready to go. The states where this project would go through have cleared the way for the project. There's no government money involved. This just takes a government okay saying, yes, it's all right to create these jobs. And these jobs not only have the short-term impact of creating the jobs that are created to build a pipeline, but the long-term impact of all the economic activity that occurs because of this new North American energy that we have access to. In delaying this program, the President is simply stalling the creation of thousands of jobs and postponing not only the growth in our economy, but also a move toward more energy security. Not too many years ago, I don't think you could say with a straight face that we really need to do everything we can to create something that closely resembles energy independence. And we are in a situation now with North American energy where we could do that. The numbers on the Keystone XL project speak for themselves. This project would create 20,000 direct jobs during the construction phase. 20,000 jobs. That's why the labor union movement in the country supports these projects. 20,000 jobs to build the pipeline. It would generate $20.9 billion in new private sector spending. It would generate around $5 billion in new state, local, and federal revenue when this project is being built and when this project is completed. Nationwide, the project would benefit 1,400 American job creators. The Keystone XL project would also help reinforce Americans' energy security by reducing our dependence on other parts of the world. You know, Canada, our largest trading partner, it's a miracle relationship. This large border that we don't worry very much about, all of the back and forth economic activity that occurs. In fact, for every dollar we'd send to Canada for that energy, they'd send 91 cents back. So this is a dollar we're spending to get 91 cents back and to be more of an energy partner with our closest neighbor, rather with the biggest border. We have clearly a bigger border with Canada than we do with Mexico. To be an energy partner with our closest neighbor rather than to worry about energy in places where, frankly, they don't like us very well. And if they do like us, they don't get the money back to us in the same way. In fact, by comparison of the 91 cents we'd get back for every dollar we'd send to Canada for North American energy coming out of Canada, we get 49 cents back from Saudi Arabia. Now, that doesn't mean Saudi Arabia is a bad trading partner. It just means they're not as good a trading partner as the Canadians are. We get 33 cents back from Venezuela. So why would we want to send a dollar to Venezuela or a dollar to Saudi Arabia for energy if we could send a dollar to Canada, and that dollar almost all comes right back to us? Domestically, this project would help encourage more oil production in the Bakken Formation and the Upper Great Plains. The Bakken Formation, which I sure didn't know about 15 years ago, and I don't know that anybody did, is thought to be the greatest new energy development since Prudhoe Bay in the 1960s. I read somewhere the other day that North Dakota, I think, has become the 4th or 5th energy-producing state in the country, passing Oklahoma. This is a great resource right at the incoming border of where this new pipeline and all this energy activity would be. You know, regardless of the White House decision to delay this project, the Canadian oil sands will be developed. And it's not a question of whether there's going to be a market or not, it's who gets the market. You know, the Canadians have said it, as they should. If we don't build a pipeline through the United States to the refineries in the southern part of the United States, we're going to build that same pipeline in another direction. Most likely the pipeline will go to the Pacific coast, and then the energy goes to Asia. Now, why would we want energy going to Asia from a trading partner where we get 91 cents back rather than energy coming here? Why would we want to buy more energy from the Middle East and less energy than we could buy from our neighbor? Why would we think for a minute that the security of the country, the energy security of the country, would be better served in any other way than this one? So this is going to most likely go to Asia. If it doesn't go to Asia, I guess it would go to the Atlantic coast and go to Europe. But what everybody believes is if it doesn't come here, they just turn the pipeline to the west instead of the south. And those oil sands, that great energy resource, goes somewhere else rather than where it makes more sense for us to get it, or more sense for them to send it. This is as close to an energy no-brainer as I can think of. But the majority leader says this project is dead on arrival in the Senate. And I don't believe he meant just dead on arrival if it was part of a package that extended the payroll tax. I think that quote was it's dead on arrival, that it's not going to go anywhere in the coming year at a time when we need those jobs, and eventually we all know as quickly as we could get it, we need to be more dependent on North American energy and less dependent on energy everywhere else. There have been many reports that say, well, the administration's timing here is in consideration for the re-election effort. This appears to be about one American job instead of more American jobs, and we need to be concerned, Mr. President, about more American jobs. Some reporters have noted, or some reports have noted, that the President's advisors, and this is a quote, fear that a decision in favor of the project would dampen enthusiasm among volunteers needed for door-to-door campaigning in battleground states. I thought that bus went to battleground states. That should be enough to get to the battleground states. We shouldn't have to worry about not having these volunteers because we choose to do what makes sense for us in an energy situation. Others have noted that, quote, the President decided to punt on this project, quote, in order to placate parts of the coalition that elected him in 2008. Americans are looking for jobs, not more of the same from Washington. This isn't time for politics. We need to jumpstart the private sector economy. And again, I'll say the quickest road to more American jobs is more American energy. For the better part of 60 years, we have used more energy than we could produce. The marketplace is there. The consumer is there. The user is there. This is what capitalism is all about. It's what free enterprise is all about. Figure out how to connect the product with the consumer. So we know the consumer's there. Let's do what we can to connect that consumer with the energy needs that they have. According to a Gallup poll, the sharp decline in the workforce last night may have more of a reflection on the large number of Americans deciding to give up looking for work. Let's do things that energize the economy and energize the American workforce. I'm glad to be a sponsor of the North American Energy Security Act. The House, again, pursued this week a similar policy as part of their effort to vote on a payroll tax extension, with this as an effort to create new jobs. You know, whether it's the Keystone Pipeline or the utility MAC rule that slows down people's decisions to make a job-creating decision, or other EPA rules and potential rules that make people think twice and three times and eventually enough times you don't do it about job creation, or what we need to do to get to the oil and gas shale reserves of the country, or oil in the Gulf of Mexico. Let's do what's necessary for North America. Let's make North American energy work for America. And I don't know a better way to do that at less government cost or less government involvement than the Keystone Pipeline. And, Mr. President, I'd yield the floor and question the presence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I ask that proceedings under the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, the senator from Delaware is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today to share a feeling that many in my home state have expressed to me. I rise today to share my frustration. And it's not just the frustration that you may feel, as I have felt, presiding over this body, when for hours at a time it is empty, when there is such precious and important work that we can and should be doing to get the people of this great country back to work, to strengthen our national security, to lay the groundwork for a strong recovery, to deal with the hundreds of issues that this body should be dealing with. I am expressing my frustration at our inability to work together and to make real progress. Today I've had the blessing of being visited by a number of Delawareans for lunch, for some business visits, for just some constituent catch-up. And as I do almost every day, I commuted down from Delaware this morning. And as I heard from folks on the train, as I've heard from folks in my office, as I've heard from folks who have written and called my offices in Delaware and here in Washington, they're puzzled and they're frustrated. They don't understand why we can't move forward. To paraphrase the good senator from Missouri who just spoke, there is a no-brainer right in front of us, and it's the extension of the payroll tax cut. It is something that at least apparently has the support of both parties in both houses. It's something that a number of economists have said is an important contributor to the modest but steady economic growth that is helping pull America out of this terrible Great Recession. And so I ask, Mr. President, why is it that we sit here stalled, unclear on when we can proceed to a vote, to a consideration of a clean payroll tax cut? Well, there have been a whole series of efforts to get us to the floor, to a vote, to an extension of the payroll tax cut. And this is a simple enough matter. Working Americans all over this country, I believe 160 million of them, will be hit with an increase in their payroll tax rate at the end of this month, just a few days now away, unless we act. And my good friend Senator Casey of Pennsylvania has suggested several versions of a payroll tax cut extension that would build upon and strengthen the payroll tax cut that the President proposed and this body passed last year. The Casey compromise that has most recently been considered and debated in this body would put up to $1,500 in the pockets of hardworking Americans all over this country and would contribute as much as 1.5% to GDP growth in the coming year. But in the last 2 weeks, we've seen our colleagues here on the other side of the aisle 4 times block our efforts through filibusters and dilatory tactics to attempt to get to a payroll tax cut extension. The first Republican version was opposed by 26 Senate Republicans. The second version opposed by 25. So on some level, Mr. President, I have to ask, what are we doing? Since when do Republicans openly oppose tax cuts? I've been in this Senate just over a year. As you know, I was sworn in last November. And in my freshman year, I've seen many moments when we've been unable to reach reasonable compromise, when we've been unable to move forward, and when we've flirted with having to shut down the whole federal government because we couldn't reach an appropriate compromise with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And now we once again stand here this Wednesday knowing that unless we can act in partnership, we will shut this government down on Friday without a continuing resolution. Last night, the House acted. They passed this payroll tax cut extension and sent it over to us. And I'm puzzled as to why we're not moving to it on the floor today. I will tell you that when we get to move to it, I will vote, and I know many others here will as well. Why? Because H.R. 3630, which passed the House last night, is not just a clean extension of the payroll tax cut bill. In fact, far from it. It is loaded up with a whole series of other policy riders, things that have nothing to do with the payroll tax cut extension, which House leadership had to do in order to garner enough votes to move it. So today, we should be considering this bill.
sent to us last night, the Speaker asking us to take it up, and it has a whole series of provisions which I suspect many here and at home don't know about. So I'll briefly consider a few of them. It undermines health care reform by punishing low- and middle-income families whose economic circumstances change during the year. It cuts 40 weeks of unemployment benefits from the 99 weeks we would like to extend to 54 weeks. It overrides the President's decision-making process on the Keystone Pipeline, in my view simply to embarrass the President. And it amends the Clean Air Act to block EPA's proposed rules on toxic air pollution from industrial boilers. It would also freeze federal pay through 2013 and impose a triple contribution, mandatory contribution, to federal retirement programs, effectively cutting federal employee pay and taking more than $50 billion out of the pockets of federal workers. To me, in some ways, most alarmingly, it allows states to impose drug testing requirements on employees who have lost their jobs and are seeking unemployment. In short, Mr. President, what has come over to us from the House last night is the farthest thing possible from a clean extension of the payroll tax cut. It is a payroll tax cut with rider after rider sitting on the back of this horse that have weighed it down so greatly that it can clearly hardly move. It is a terrible bill, and in my view, we should move to it, dispose of it, and get back to the business of the country. Last, I'm puzzled as to why we're not proceeding to it. My recollection, and I don't have the joy of sitting here on the floor all the time, but my recollection from what I've read and heard is that the Republican leader has twice called on us to move to this bill. I believe he did so twice earlier this week, saying that we should put partisanship aside and promptly take up whatever is sent over to us from the House by way of a payroll tax cut extension. I think I quote when I say his comment was, the first thing we need to find out is whether there are the votes in the Senate to pass what the House has passed. So I'd rather not speculate about what happens. I'm hoping we're spending our time and energy trying to get this bill passed in the Senate as well in the House. Perfectly reasonable attitude. We should proceed to this bill. We're here. We have the bill. We've been waiting almost literally the entire day without making any progress. Mr. President, we need to extend tax cuts for payroll. We need to extend tax cuts that incentivize clean energy investments. We need to extend tax cuts that can help inspire innovation, research, and development. There's a whole list of tax cuts that will expire at the end of this year without action. We need to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. We need to pass a continuing resolution to fund this government and the rest of this year's appropriations bills. Mr. President, there are so many important bills to which we must turn. My sole question is, why, when we tried to proceed to this bill this morning, did the Republican leader object? I'm just a freshman, but I represent a state that is deeply frustrated and puzzled. Since when do Republicans load up a tax cut extension with so many riders that they're afraid to even bring it to a vote on the floor of this chamber? I am puzzled. I am frustrated. And with that, I yield the floor.